Good day. This is M.H. Mapolon. I'd like to talk about the Filipino heart, soul, and the idea of moral governance. Scientists say that personal traits move on through generations. Practices by people tens of thousands of years ago are recorded as instructions within each person's DNA, which are then passed on through time. Until practices are changed through actual experience or through conscious decision, such traits remain with the people and become characteristics of people within a certain location, within a certain time. It is always desirable to preserve and continue on with such traits, which tend to carry our people to success and progress, and to consciously wean away those which tend to do the opposite. At the onset of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao, something has been added to the recipe of governance, which at first glance seems to be unique and to a certain extent trailblazing: the idea of morality and moral governance. Moral governance has become the call of the bar in carrying the responsibility of governing and serving the Bangsamoro, and towards the change that the Bangsamoro government aspired for its people and territory. For Bangsamoros, moral governance means that the acts of the Bangsamoro government must be legal and legitimate, its policy making rational and deliberate. It is responsible to its people and ensures checks, balances, and accountability to them. In other words, a government composed of public servants in its real sense, servants who are prepared to sacrifice their well-being for the well-being of the people whom they serve. I would like to titillate your minds, however, by inserting the idea that although this comes from the Bangsamoro right now, beyond foreign extant concepts from which a number of individuals have sought to educate our people with grand flourishes of moral governance and excellence, there are Philippine elements which I believe lie at the very core of the Filipino mind, passed on to us and our children for generations, which has ingrained a deep sense of moral governance, which has been embedded in the Filipino DNA since time immemorial. Let's begin with history. Philippine ancestry goes back way before the advent of the Spaniards in 1521. Thousands of years before then, our forefathers have carried on with their own social, cultural, political, and economic practices and have introduced persistent instructions which have stayed within the Filipino psyche. Whether consciously or unconsciously, we have received these gifts of traits which have become the basis of our identity as Filipinos. I will call it our kakanyahan. Our kakanyahan has allowed us to be at the forefront of the world at present times. This kakanyahan has stood up in the midst of crisis and worldwide challenges and has made the world recognize the strength of character of this Malay race. Yet, even through history, amidst war, colonization, natural calamities, and social upheavals, our kakanyahan has stood up in the midst of crisis and worldwide challenges and has made the world recognize the strength of character of this Malay race. Yet even throughout history, amidst war, colonization, natural calamities, and social upheavals, our kakanyahan has distinguished Filipinos as upstanding citizens of this planet. While such traits are carried on through time, it is always good to be aware of these legacy traits to reinforce their continuity through generations to come, and to allow the Filipino to steadfastly work and move towards social, economic, and cultural progress. This awareness serves as our source of inspiration and instills in our hearts and minds pride in being Filipinos, born out of conscious knowledge of this rich and enduring heritage. We are Filipinos, and this is our kakanyahan. This has been flowing within Filipino blood since time immemorial and will continue to flow exponentially as we move as a people through continuing history. I believe that the idea of moral governance may have its roots in ingredients which make up the heart and soul of Filipinos, this kakanyahan. Let's start with the heart, the Filipino heart. Let me say this. I believe that the heart, our heart as Filipinos, is the source of energy that can make or break us as a people. The heart is regarded as the center of life in any living body. It pumps much needed blood, which carries nourishing nutrients that allows that body to carry on its mission. A strong heart renders the body strong and active. Now, the Filipino heart nourishes the Filipino as a race, as a people, and eventually as a strong nation. It has distinguished the Filipino throughout the world and has come out as a source of pride and resilience for us Filipinos. In the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has devastated the world, the Filipino heart has stood up through Filipino doctors and nurses, through Filipino seafarers, emergency workers, even overseas workers throughout the world. If we trace the foundations of this heart, we can find them. We can find them in traits which have been in the midst of the Filipino people, nurtured through time, throughout customs, traditions, and culture. These traits are embedded within the Filipino communities through time, passed on forward, and carried by the Filipino DNA. Like blood vessels, the Filipino carries it as he travels the country and eventually the world. This heart manifests itself through myriad representations that can be seen, heard, felt, or even tasted. How can we recognize the elements of the Filipino heart? Well, to start with, we can look at its manifestations in characteristics that have been the mark of this Malay race through time. At this juncture, we encourage you to recall your own experiences and relive how they flow through your own veins, even now, as you are hearing this. For one, let's start with pagkamakatao. The Filipino heart is easily recognized by this characteristic, which has been regarded by some, as a weakness. The Filipino, first and foremost, respects the humanity of every person around. This carries on through stages of human development where both children and adults have been accorded due respect. Next, let's look at pagkamakatao. Pagkamakatao is also manifested across the social strata from then until now. Let's look at this. Have you ever felt awkward calling the waiter, "Waiter!" in a restaurant, and have instead resorted to the term "kuya, kuya," or "ate," or even "boss," or sometimes even "cheap"? We even accord the same names to beggars in the streets We call them manong, kuya, ate, not hoy. This is the Filipino heart, uplifting the plight of fellow Filipinos and refusing to use debasing language out of pure respect. Pagkamakatao can be seen through other virtues that have been recognized as Filipino. Take, for example, the concept of bayanihan, which is often depicted in visual works by a group of people carrying a house on their shoulders during olden times, and kawanggawa, which naturally motivates Filipinos to provide assistance to those in need. While it is difficult to manifest bayanihan in these times of concrete and metal houses, the spirit of the concept has persisted through time in the form of assistance extended neighbors and community members at the time of natural calamities and health emergencies. This has been manifested, for example, in the advent and persistence of the COVID-19 pandemic, where Filipinos all over the islands established community pantries. Have you heard of those community pantries? When the Taal volcano erupted in Batangas province, Filipinos from all over the country sent relief goods, with some personally traveling in their own vehicles and cars to the region to render assistance personally. When the province of Leyte was devastated by a destructive typhoon, Yolanda in 2014, Filipino volunteers trooped to the island to help. This is the Filipino heart at its best. The Filipino heart is also manifested in ways only a Filipino can understand, like utang na loob and hiya. Utang na loob, roughly translated meaning internal debt or debt of gratitude. For Filipinos, it goes more than that. It provides a much deeper meaning and includes a deeply embedded sense of moral debt, which has no monetary or material equivalent and is very difficult to recompense. For Filipinos, having utang na loob means a deeply embedded link which can reach the innermost recesses of the soul. It provides a very strong bond between the indebted and the grantor of that debt, of a favor which existed at the time of the debtor's great need. The grantor of the favor is usually morally obliged to allow the favor to pass without being returned, or it can be taken as a sign of abuse or haughtiness, kayabangan. For those who was granted the favor, however, there is a common communal expectation to return the favor somehow. Now let's go to hiya. Hiya is roughly translated as shame. Like other manifestation of the Filipino heart, though, it contemplates moral or communal astuteness and is accompanied by an unspoken expectation to stand by communally accepted norms of conduct. As such, being called walang hiya or no shame is a grave personal insult to a Filipino. Have you been called walang hiya by another Filipino? How did it feel? This is the Filipino heart's way of making the Filipino fall in step with society's norm. This is a form of moral governance. At the center of the Filipino heart is the virtue of respect for the humanity of each and every person. Paggalang ang tawag natin. It goes beyond respect, though, and continues on to honor that humanity. At first glance, it may be mistaken for social stratification or social classes. A closer inspection will reveal none of class distinction, but a hierarchy of places of respect or honor. For example, paggalang sa matatanda or respect for elders follows a hierarchy of honor and respect. Kuya or ate has to be honored. Kuya or ate must, in turn, honor inay or itay, mother or father, who are obliged to honor lolo and lola, grandfather and grandmother. To some, it may seem like some sort of pecking order, but I'd rather look at it as a hierarchy of honor. This, I think, is based on the fact that the one on a higher pedestal has had more time in the world, hence, more experience and wisdom worthy of honor. In some respects, paggalang can actually be earned by doing service to the community and accorded like a medal of honor or recognition. Thus, without conferring plaques, the Filipino heart confers communal value to the worthy. Thus, one can be referred to as Gat Jose Rizal, Gat Andres Bonifacio, which is an abbreviation of the term Gatdula, a title vested on someone who has done greatness during his or her time. Now let's go to paggalang at pagkilala, the Filipino virtues for respect and recognition cuts across race, gender, or economic status. The Tagalog po and opo and the terms manong, manang, in Ilocano, ading, serves as audible signals of respect. History is replete with instances where recognition and respect were accorded women and youth, like Gabriela Silang and Gregorio del Pilar, long before women and the youth were accorded due recognition in other countries in the world. Even the LGBT community were accorded respect and recognition, as historians have noted that a lot of babaylans, did you know this, revered spiritual leaders during olden times, could be classified now as LGBT persons. Paggalang also translates into gender equity. The Filipino heart does not discriminate based on gender. One of the terms for spouse, however, katuwang, envisions an equitable complementary relationship between the married man and woman. Following the Filipino heart, a woman can occupy leadership roles in Filipino society and in the Filipino traditional family, especially before the Spanish occupation. Finally, the Filipino heart designates paggalang as care for the elderly. Did you notice that homes for the elderly are few and far in between in the Philippines? This is because part of the concept of respect is the obligation to take care of your elder parents until death. In fact, sending your elder parents to a home for the aged is tantamount to kawalan ng utang na loob or absence of a debt of gratitude for the care our parents have extended to us in our youth. Now, internal fortitude. The Filipino heart shows internal fortitude for the Filipino. This is seen in the virtues of lakas ng loob, pagkamasayahin, isang salita, and pagkamasigasig. Let's start with lakas ng loob. Lakas ng loob is more than bravery. It is more than courage. For the Filipino, it involves a circumspect way of looking and dealing with the world. It is not just taking blind risk, but carries with it an internal resolve to overcome challenges and adversities. We need not see it in national heroes only. In fact, we see it in ways and means that our economically advantaged people dealt with adversity. Like people who recycle leftover chicken into pagpag. Do you know what pagpag is? To tide their families over, or street vendors who brave pollution and street accidents to sell their ways on the street, or working students who strive at manual labor to see themselves through school. I know a person in Mindoro who started out as a janitor in a branch of the Philippine National Bank and retired as a bank manager. Fortitude. Now, pagkamasayahin is when you see smiles in the midst of disaster, war, conflict, conflagrations. A friend of mine who has worked in Afghanistan tells of a time when the ministry he was assigned in suffered a complex military attack with bombs, guns, explosives, IEDs. And they were confined along with other international humanitarian workers in a bomb shelter. While all hell was breaking loose around them. While the others cried and fretted, the Filipinos in the group cracked jokes, which, well, in the end, lifted everybody's spirits in the midst of adversity. They say this is a Filipino characteristic. Pagkamasayahin in the midst of challenges, problems, and other adversities. Now, isang salita. Isang salita may have originated way back when Filipinos were trading with Chinese and Indian merchants long before the Spaniards came. There were no written contracts then. People relied on isang salita, word of honor. And Filipinos always kept their word. The heart of the Filipino is bound by commitments made, albeit verbally. The Spaniards called it palabra de honor, word of honor. It's been part of the Filipino heart way before they came. And they delivered on their word. Pagkamasigasig. Pagkamasigasig is relentless effort to work towards a solution to a challenge or adversity. The Filipino heart is relentless and does not give up easily. It looks for ways and means out of glut and is not satisfied until the challenge is overcome and effective solutions are implemented. Tying this up is the virtue of pakikisama, which can be in moral governance a negative or positive trait. But pakikisama, more than friendship, more than camaraderie, it is the culmination of the Filipino community spirit and entails not just teamwork, but also emotional support and integrity. No one is left behind. Walang laglagan, or no one is thrown under the bus. So, that is the Filipino heart. And it constitutes, as I said, one of the foundations of moral governance. Now let's go to the next, the Filipino soul. Soul, the Tagalog term is kaluluwa, is our spirit. What we cannot see but believe it as presence in our lives and continues on even when we die. I believe that the Filipino race, like each one of us, has a soul for a race. What is the soul of the Filipino as a race? For me, It is like a glue which has been with our race since the time of our forefathers and naturally unites us as a people. It can be seen in the Filipino way of doing things, traditions, in values, in culture, attitude, and traits as a people. It is a flavor that is distinctly Filipino. You can look at it as our Filipino identification card. Like certain physical characteristics that we inherit from our parents, we, believe it or not, have inherited that Filipino soul. It is undoubtedly us, undoubtedly Filipino. This means that as you are listening to this, you have already within you a Filipino soul. It is deep within you, and whether you notice it or not, guides your action and behavior. Through it, other races can see you as uniquely Filipino, wherever you may be. More than this, I have considered this to be energy which drives every Filipino and eventually defines us as one race, Filipino. It flows in our veins. It has allowed the Filipino race to distinguish itself time and again throughout the world, even in times of problems and challenges. As I have mentioned earlier, that which makes up the Filipino soul can be found in our values, traits, practices, behavior, and is very closely related to the earlier discussion, to the Filipino heart. These elements make up the whole of the Filipino character since the time of our early forefathers. This goes way, way back, even from our ancestors' experiences before the Spaniards, before Americans, and before the Japanese occupations. As Filipinos, I believe that our soul comes from four major sets of characteristics: a sense of community, a strong sense of justice and fairness, a strong set of work habits and values, and an inner strength which comes from humor, a caring attitude, and an inner character of selflessness and sacrifice. As each set contains more than one element, I will discuss and try to explain what I mean. Let's start with the Filipino sense of community. I've discussed this earlier. Have you seen a picture of a group of people carrying a house on their shoulders to transfer it to another place? Right, we call it bayanihan. Filipinos are usually shown helping each other in a lot of ways, more than carrying houses. We also call it kawanggawa. This shows a sense of belongingness and care for members of a closely knit community. For a while, I thought that this sense of community is no longer with us. However, in things that happened very recently, I was amazed at how this has manifested in times of challenges and calamity. They work together to provide assistance to fellow Filipinos in needs of food and other basic necessities, regardless of race, creed, location, or political affiliation. I believe that the sense comes from our sense of kapwa. You most probably know this Filipino word. Roughly translated in English, it means, quote-unquote, fellow men. For us Filipinos, though, it has a deeper meaning. Our kapwa is not just another fellow. Our kapwa is regarded as our family, whether or not we are relatives. Any Filipino is our kuya, and ate, and tito, and tita, our nanay and tatay. Everyone every single one of them is our kapwa. It becomes our obligation to support and care for each other. Not to do so would be being heartless. Kawang-gawa instills in every member of the community to do the same for members of other communities who are in need. It is, to Filipinos, the spirit of pananagutan, the Filipino sense of responsibility for another human being. As the song goes, tayong lahat ay may pananagutan sa isa't isa. We are all responsible for each other. This can also be seen in a trait which has made Filipinos known all over the world: Philippine hospitality. Enter any Filipino household and you will be immediately offered something to eat or drink. What is amazing is that you will be offered food and drinks even when those welcoming you hardly have enough. Resources will be shared, and most of the time, the guests will even be offered the best portions and the more special, quote-unquote, potajes or fares. This sense of community can be seen during times of fiestas. If you have been in a Philippine fiesta, you know that you should not indulge in the first house you visit, as the rest of the community expects you to partake of their own handa and may take offense if you do not. In a fiesta, strangers are welcomed with open arms to partake. This community habit promotes a sense of oneness and belongingness called pakikisama, which has constituted a strong bond between Filipinos. I believe that this concept allowed Filipinos to bond together against injustice and colonization. When push came to shove, it was a driving force in the Philippine Revolution of 1898. Finally, it has allowed and continue to allow Filipinos to be united by race through a communal sense of brotherhood, kapatiran, which brings us to the next set, the Filipino sense of justice and fairness. The Filipino soul enables us to have a sense of community. More than this, the Filipino soul has a strong sense of justice and fairness, which is reflected in the way Filipinos relate to each other as well as other people. The word patas, roughly translated in English as fair, can be encountered by every Filipino in different stages in life. In the family, with brothers and sisters, everyone is instructed to be fair. This carries on to the playground, where everyone is expected maglaro ng patas, play fair. You will encounter this term throughout the Filipino life. This is very important to us Filipinos. While we are patient and forgiving, our forefathers have hardly tolerated abuses, unfair treatment, and injustice. In Philippine history, our ancestors have been known to fight against injustice and unfair treatment. Some have even died in their defense. Records of rebellion and revolution as arms and concerted communal action have been taken against oppressors and tyrants in Philippine society. Justice, in the Filipino sense, has a deeper meaning. Let me quote the very important senator, human rights advocate, and lawyer, Jose Pepe Diokno. He said, Tagalogs, Cebuanos, Ilonggos, and Pampangos have a common word for justice, katarungan. The root word of katarungan is tarong, a Visayan word which means straight, upright, appropriate, or correct. For Filipinos, therefore, justice is rectitude, doing the morally right act, being upright, or doing what is appropriate. How's that for moral governance? And since justice includes doing what is appropriate or what is right, it includes the concept of equity, for which we have no native word. In this respect, our language is different from the English language, which distinguishes between justice and equity. In the Filipino sense, justice is equity. That may help you understand what he said. In a sense, katarungan stands for what we are expected to do as human beings to other human beings. This should be right, proper, and correct, according to how we have been brought up by our forebears. Justice and fairness appeals to a strong sense of how to do things right and how to treat other human beings right. This has been passed on by Filipino action to you. At this point in your life, you can feel if things are not just and things are not right. And you can feel that you are supposed to act accordingly to a set of rules, most of the time unspoken. These rules tell us what we should do and should not do to our fellow human beings. Have you felt bad if other people are not treated right? I would believe you have felt bad. This is the Filipino sense of justice and fairness working inside you. Finally, if you look around you, people in the community knows that people in a general sense are not really equal. Some are poor, some are rich, some are powerful, some are not. The Filipino soul, however, allows them to deal with their fellow man by providing them with what they do not have. It's like a classmate sharing his baon to another classmate who does not have that baon. If a person is weak, another Filipino would assist him, allowing him to work or to do work he cannot do and giving him assistance to complete tasks. This I would term as a sense of equity. One Filipino assisting another to help complete things. Food where there is no food, strength where another person lacks it. For example, take the word katuwang, roughly translated in English as partner. It carries with it a concept of completeness, which can only be achieved when we help each other. What is lacking in another is completed by the katuwang. The katuwang can be your mother, sister, friend, neighbors, your wife, your husband, anyone who helps you complete what you need to do. Justice and fairness in this sense means Filipinos working together to make sure things are done fairly and justly. People complete each other. Like my example above, for everything to be fair and just. In that sense of justice, meaning is there only because people complete each other. This is the Filipino sense of justice and fairness. This sense of justice motivates the Filipino in youth, in love, in work, and play, even in war, so that they can work together to make everyone's life better, complete each other's life better. This sense of justice is in you if you search yourself. Now, let's look at that strong sense of work habits and attitude. Our national hero, Dr. Jose Rizal, in his essay entitled The Indolence of Filipinos, defends the strong Filipino work ethic. While he agrees that some Filipinos have weak work ethics, he says that this is due to the years of suffering and abuse endured under those who have colonized us as a people. He believes and maintains that our forefathers have always been industrious. I will agree with him. I consider a set of strong work habits and attitudes to be one of the key elements of the Filipino soul. This has been demonstrated by Filipinos all over the world. If you have a family member or a relative who is an overseas Filipino worker, you must have heard stories of how Filipino workers are regarded in the world. That is why Filipino doctors and nurses are sought for all over the world. Filipino seafarers are also sought all over the maritime world and are regarded as the best seamen or women in the world. Some have risen to be captains of huge ships and are paid high salaries. For any job anywhere in the world, Filipinos have exhibited its own brand of work ethic, one that is meticulous, passionate, responsible, and more than anything else, humane. The Filipino work ethic. Even in the country, examples of this work ethic can be found in public servants and Philippine organizations. This can also be seen in the informal sector, who work hard daily to feed their families. Taho and balot sellers, fishball and peanut hawkers, barbecue vendors, market vendors, all the lot. As Rizal has said, give the Filipinos the right opportunities and you will know that they are not indolent. And I say, give Filipinos a chance and they can shape the world into something good. This is driven by this element of the Philippine soul. Look around you. Identify and verify that this is around you. And be proud. Own this as a Filipino. Another element of the Filipino soul. The Filipino strength, which comes from humor, a caring attitude, and an inner character of selflessness and sacrifice. They say Filipino humor knows no bounds. Filipinos are one of the happiest peoples in the world. In the olden times, this can be seen in the form of Filipino jokes, which involve humor dispensed in parties and other social gatherings. I thought that cooped up inside their own houses during the pandemic, I will no longer see Filipino humor. I was mistaken. Check the memes in your social media. You can find humor everywhere. Filipino humor has reverberated as only Filipino humor can in virtual halls of social media and even contributed to the Philippines being the foremost social media user in the world. In a survey conducted by the Social Weather Station in 2014, it found that the sense of humor mattered to 95% of those surveyed, these are Filipinos, over good looks or even wealth. Filipinos value people with a sense of humor. This shows that humor drives the Filipino. It allows the Filipino to relax in times of stress, in the middle of problems, in difficult times. It helps Filipinos to look for solutions with a level head and a steady heart. The happy soul wins over the lonely heart. More than this, however, the Filipino soul has endowed us with strong sense of caring for other people and self-sacrifice for our fellow Filipinos. We respect the humanity of the person. We call it paggalang. It goes beyond respect though. When you have paggalang, you go beyond and give the one you respect honor. A closer inspection will reveal a hierarchy of places to respect or honor. It gives us something to live for when we ourselves reach that level. It comes with a deep sense of pride when we say, tatay na ako. And we are given that kind of respect and honor that I have discussed earlier. This virtue of respect and honor allows us Filipinos to relate to people with a certain amount of delicate care. It enables the Filipino to do feats of self-sacrifice to allow and show respect and honor for another individual, and provides a strong and lasting bond with all other Filipinos who they come into contact with. This internal strength drives the Filipino towards resilience and endurance, and that endurance allows him to weather all kinds of problems and overcome all kinds of challenges. Now, let's take them together. The Filipino heart, soul, and moral governance. Taken together, all the traits share two things in common: the ideas of equity and dynamism. Equity, in that the idea of equality is a bogus concept. There is very little evidence of equality in the world, and it is not self-evident that the world is created equal. Rather, inequality is so prevalent in the world that sometimes I wonder, is it because of the grand Western anachronisms that the rest of the world does not see that elephant in the room? Or that the emperor wears no clothes? Filipinos, however, in these traits, exhibit the counterfactual of this bogus concept, the concept of equity. And this idea of equity exists in an environment of dynamism. And for lack of a better English term other than dynamism, discarte. I believe that Filipinos thrive in the midst of challenges and uncertainty because they do not hold on to permanent ideas. As such, a lot of things are dependent on changing situations, and things and acts become right or wrong depending on these situations. This feeds on the idea of moral governance. Moral governance cannot be just legalistic, it cannot be immovable, and it cannot be permanent. The definitions of paggalang and bayanihan has different permutations that, if we recognize them as the foundations of moral governance itself in the Philippine setting, we ought to recognize that the permutations of moral governance is likewise not in the word governance itself or moral governance itself, but in how that word is used in different situations. It cannot be confined to a defined box with other quote-unquote permanent concepts we seem to have. The philosopher Wittgenstein himself held that the meaning of a word is not in the word itself, but in how it is used in different language games. That would mean that moral governance is in reality a fleeting concept whose sense and application is bound within the environment of use and convention. A lot of Westerners so used to the idea of permanent concepts like equality and justice cannot understand this. But we Filipinos can. We know that negotiating in a world with people and attitude takes discarte. I sleep well at night, however, because I know that moral governance can be done because its dynamic seeds has been planted in the hearts and the souls of the Filipino people. This has been M.H. Mapolan, philosopher on a bangko, reflecting the words of my friend Carl, saying, philosophers have always interpreted the world. The point, however, is to change it. So, let's